live, Chair.
Well, good afternoon and welcome to Monmouthshire County Council's Governance Audit Committee meeting for 27th of November 2025. We'll get straight on with the agenda, starting with apologies for absence. Be notified of one absence, that's David Jones. If that could be noted, please. Second agenda item is declarations of interest. Do members have declarations of interest to report at this stage, please? Okay, nil return. We'll move on to item 3. Item 3 is public open forum. This is the opportunity for members of the public to make written or oral representations to the committee. I'm not aware of any at this stage, so we can move on to item 4. Item 4 is to note the action list from the previous meeting. We have one outstanding action. Could I hand over to Jan Furtek, our Chief Internal Auditor, to provide a brief update on this, please?
Thank you, Chair. So I have had a discussion with the Deputy Chief Executive regarding the budget available for staff training, and there is a budget available within the main internal audit budget, and there will be sufficient resource there to ensure that we have full training across the team.
Okay, that sounds really positive. On that basis, unless there's any observations from members, we can close for that action. Thank you, Jan. Let's move swiftly on to item 5. Item 5 is the Audit Wales report into arrangements for commissioning services and the council management's response to the recommendations set out. At this stage, could I welcome Steve Wyndham and Catherine McCarthy from Audit Wales, who will talk us through the report. I assume it's Catherine to start. Please assume we've read your report, but nonetheless highlight key points of note. Over to you, Catherine.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I'm just going to go through the arrangements for commissioning services review. This audit is part of a national thematic review carried out in all 22 councils of Wales, with the local reports being produced for each council. When we refer to commissioning, we mean the decision-making process that every council uses to decide how best it can deliver its service. It is the process that leads up to the decision on how it will either make, buy, start or stop delivering a service. It's important to note that this review did not extend onto procurement activity or arrangements for managing contracts. Our focus of the audit was to determine the extent that the council's corporate arrangements, 1, support and guide services when considering commissioning a service, and 2, the extent that they provide assurance to the council that the decision on which service delivery option offers best value for money consistently considers a minimum range of factors. We also reviewed how the council developed its commissioning arrangements in accordance with the Sustainable Development Principle that will help the council to secure value for money. We reviewed the council's corporate commissioning arrangements and then tested these arrangements by examining the process of 3 services that had been commissioned. These were household waste and recycling, bus services, and mental health information, advice and assistance. We consulted with the council when selecting the services that we examined. We met with officers responsible for the 3 services, as well as the officers responsible for supporting services through a commissioning process. We conducted this work during the period November 2024 to February 2025, and this report reflects the arrangements the council had in place at that time. The overall audit question that we sought to answer was that in commissioning services, does the council put in place proper arrangements to secure value for money in the use of its resources? Within our report, we conclude that the council does not have arrangements in place to ensure that it consistently secures value for money when commissioning services. As a general point, we have found that many councils of Wales have struggled to demonstrate corporate commissioning arrangements that are consistently applied across the organisation, and that inform the decision to make or buy and precedes the procurement process. I'll just highlight some of the key findings now from the report. The Council does not consistently define the services it intends to commission. The Council does not routinely explain why it needs to commission services. The Council does not ensure that it always undertakes a comprehensive appraisal of commissioning options before deciding to commission a service. The Council does not consistently plan its commissioning activities over an appropriate timescale. The Council does not consistently set out how the value for money of commissioned services will be assessed and monitored. The Council has considered the wider impacts its commissioned services could have and incorporated these principles into its overarching strategies and plans. However, it has not put in place arrangements to ensure this happens consistently as part of the commissioning process. The Council does not consistently ensure that it involves the right people and partners when designing commissioned services. The Council collaborates with partners to deliver some commissioned services. And the Council does not consistently evaluate the value for money of its approach to commissioning. However, it has reviewed the effectiveness of its approach in the past. For example, following a review in 2020, the Council outsourced its procurement function to a collaborative arrangement with 3 other councils called Ardell. However, there is no council-wide guidance for service areas to follow when reviewing the value for money of their approach to commissioning. The report contains 2 recommendations found at page 9. The first recommendation is to establish consistent commissioning arrangements. And the second recommendation is to embed those arrangements across the Council. The Council has completed a management response form stating its actions to address these recommendations. Our Code of Audit Practice requires us to consider the Council's response to our recommendations, and we are satisfied with the Council's response. I'd just like to thank the Council for their support in helping us to undertake this review. Thank you, Chair. Back to you.
Thank you. Okay, on the face of it, they sounded fairly serious findings, and you know, I think they're reflected in the recommendations. But you also made reference to the fact that a number of other councils find it challenging to demonstrate value for money across the commissioning services. Recognising this is a local report, have you a timeline in terms of when we expect to see that national report to really help us contextualise these findings, please, Catherine?
Of course, I believe we're in the early stages of bringing together the findings from all the reports. I don't have an exact timeline, but I can certainly find that out and get back to you.
Okay, thank you. That would be helpful. Right. If we go to members for questions or comments, we'll start with Phil, please.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Catherine, you said earlier on, in fact, you mentioned procurement a couple of times. It's a major part of the commissioning that the Council carries out. So was this exercise just basically to look at all the procedures around commissioning, or is there going to be another follow-up for actual commissioning that's taking place? Because, all right, you're looking at social services, you're looking at various things, but you know, the setup with Cardiff is a real major part of the expenditure of the council. So, you know, where are you going with that, if at all?
Thanks. So, yes, the remit for this audit was limited to sort of that pre-procurement activity, so the commissioning, and we were looking at the council's overall corporate arrangements. So that sort of limited the scope of this particular audit. We appreciate there's obviously a lot more to that, and there's overlap, especially when it comes to procurement. In terms of future work, again, I'd have to go back and double check and get back to you if we have any plans to to undertake further work in sort of the procurement area.
Okay, thanks.
Tony.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for your report, Catherine. I remember the debate in this chamber on this committee on Ardal in 2020. It was quite a long debate. I'm suggesting that maybe did we not learn the lessons of that particular policy that we put into place in 2020 or 2021? Because it seems to me we're getting a lot of negative vibes from yourselves as Audit Wales. Have we learnt, or do we need to learn a lot more?
I wonder, Catherine, is that a question you feel able to answer? If not, I'll hand over to one of the officers. And perhaps I could look to Peter Davis, Deputy Chief Executive, to comment, please.
Thank you, Chair. I'll pick up a comment to respond to Councillor Rees and probably just take the opportunity, I guess, whilst I've got the mic, just to offer a couple of comments, I guess. I'll maybe just do it slightly in reverse. Appreciative of the report as summarised. I guess for those committee members who've obviously taken the opportunity to read the report through, hopefully that'll give a level of additional context. Correct me if I'm wrong, but obviously the work that was initiated, it was looking at the whole authority commissioning arrangements and to the extent that those were suitably in place. And the audit work, which clearly was limited to your point in terms of there being 22 local authority pieces of work. There were 3, I think from memory, tracer areas that were chosen to look into. I'm not sure that any of those tracer areas identified any significant and serious concern, back to your point, Chair. But I think it was accepted and acknowledged that what we don't have, I think, well enough in place is the overarching framework that sort of guides our commissioning arrangements. And it sort of teases its way then both into Councillor Murphy's point, and drawing, I guess, that subtle distinction, I think, with the fact that commissioning is a precursor to what we may more commonly and traditionally describe as procurement and the procurement process. So I think context in that regard is just important. So it's not as if we do not have commissioning arrangements in place. Let's just make that clear. We do, and down and from within our services. It is just the overarching arrangements. We've accepted the recommendations, and I think the management comments that go alongside sort of reflect that. Final bit before I come to close Councillor Easton's question off. We have taken the opportunity. Kath was with me. We had the meeting of the Ardal steering group, which took place on Monday, was it? Last couple of weeks have been a blur for obvious reasons. And there is a desire, I think, through Ardal, which is obviously the 4 local authorities that represent Ardal. But I think I'm happy to say I can well understand there being probably a wider appetite through the All Wales network and procurement network to actually work constructively to address that sort of consistent recommendation that seems to be featuring in many of the local authority pieces of work that's been done by Audit Wales, which is actually and I think actually doing it in that way will drive a level of consistency of approach and practice across the sector. So I think that's a good thing in terms of responding to the consistency of recommendation that Audit Wales has brought forward. Back to Councillor Easton's point, again, to that subtle distinction between commissioning and procurement. Ardal isn't there to establish commissioning arrangements. That's for the council itself and through its through service areas. But again, back to the core recommendation from the Audit Wales report, you will well understand that there is more than an interest of Ardal and procurement to ensuring that overarching commissioning framework is well established. So I think their appetite, I think, to work collectively and possibly even more widely across Wales, I think, is a good outcome. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you, Peter. Tony, did you want to come back at all?
Not really. I'm reassured by Peter's comments. He does come over with a good answer, which is good. But yes, it was a concern in that period of time, 2020-21, about the £75,000 was that area of concern. So I would say watch this space.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions or comments, please? Colin.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I think, just following on from those comments, I think the committee perhaps might like to see more around procurement arrangements as those documents develop for a variety of reasons.
Thank you. If I turn to the management responses then, as already mentioned, the management or officers are looking to develop a commissioning framework. I'd be quite keen to see that when it's at a suitable state as part of our work to scrutinise and confirm we're happy to close off these actions. So if I could ask Richard Jones to ensure that happens, please. Before we move on, are there any other questions or comments before we look to close this item? No? Oh, pardons. Sarah.
Perhaps it will be covered under the framework when it comes through, but just reflecting on that, the devolved nature of our commissioning, and wondering whether perhaps operational managers have the time, space and training to perhaps think through a very broad commissioning process before entering into that procurement, the procurement process, and developing future relationships with organisations where there may be organisations where they've been working with for many years.
Thank you. Does any officer want to respond to that? If not, that's fine. Okay, I think it's a valid observation. Okay, thank you, Catherine, for the paper. Thanks for you attending this committee. It's much appreciated. Let's move on then to item 6. Item 6 is the audit plan for the Welsh Church Funds. I've welcomed Steve already. So Steve, over to you. Assume we've read the paper, but maybe set out points of note.
Okay, thank you, Chair, and good afternoon, everyone. Yes, this is our annual audit plan in respect of the Welsh Church Act audit for 24-25. I'll just take you through the very main points, but it sets out the audit team, the audit risks, the fee, the estimated fee, I should say, for this year, and the timescales with which we work into. I'll just very briefly touch on each of those 4 points. In terms of the audit risks, there's 2 noted within the plan. One is management override. You're probably well versed in the fact that I or colleagues would always say that's a standard, that's a given risk in regard to all of our work, and not just our work, every external audit provider. It's a risk we've got to acknowledge and respond to in regard to each and every audit. So it's not unique to this audit or to Monmouth Council. And the second risk is in regard to the valuation of property assets. Now, that's not because we think it's going to be a particular weakness, I guess, in the council. It's purely because it's a material balance, and therefore there's an inherent risk of error, as there often is in regard to valuation issues. So there will be a focus of our audit work. Moving on to the timeline. The audit has in fact already commenced, and we are on track to complete the audit and enable certification and the submission to the Charity Commission by the required deadline of 31st of January next year. And we're on track to report back to this committee in January in terms of our findings. So yeah, in terms of the timeline, it's happening now and completion is quite imminent. In terms of the fee, which is the third area I said I'd comment on, the estimated fee is set out within the plan. That's £8,100, which is a 1.7% increase on last year's fee, in line with our standard inflationary adjustments in regard to our audit fees for last year. And finally, the plan sets out the members of the audit team. Hopefully you recognise some of those names, the majority, all of which are members of the Monmouthshire audit team and worked on the recent the council's accounts audit. So hopefully that provides good continuity. You know, we work with Monmouth, we work with the officers, we know Monmouthshire rather. So yeah, that's probably all I wish to say in regard to the audit plan, but very happy to take any questions you might have.
Thank you, Steve. Okay, so, questions then, please, for Steve. Phil.
Only a quick one, Steve. I know the Monmouthshire Farm School isn't a full audit, but is it the same team, and do you adopt the same criteria for that?
It's the same team. It's exactly the same team undertaking the audit across to the two of the charities, but because it's an independent examination, the level of audit work we undertake is a lot lower than we do than on the Welsh Church Act Fund. So, as for instance, there's no audit plan, for example, but we do have like procedures we work through in regard to these independent examinations, and it would not be in the same level of detail as which I just said in regard to the Church Act. So it will be a lighter touch.
Okay, thanks.
Tony.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. It's not a real comment about this report. I think it's a good report. It analyses what we've got. But as with the Farm Trust, this particular Church Act Fund is a valuable fund for communities. I think it should be publicised more. I'd never sat on the Welsh Church Fund, I sat on the Farm Trust, but I think that publicity is important for the local communities to know that it exists, because a lot of people don't know it exists. Thank you.
No, it's a fair observation. I think it's a matter for the trustees. Quite frankly, perhaps, you can make those representations to trustees, because I think it's a valid point. Thank you. Okay, in the absence of any other questions or comments, let's move on to item 7. Item 7 is the Q2 Treasury report for the current financial year. Could I welcome John Davis, our Head of Finance. John, are you going to start off with introducing his paper?
Good afternoon, Chair and Committee. Jonathan Davis, Head of Finance. Daniel Francis is on the call, who's the author of the paper, and hopefully it's quite a straightforward read for you all, but I think Dan's going to take us through the main headline points of it, and happy to come back in at the back end if there's any further questions, Chair.
No, thank you. I wasn't sure. Over to you then, Dan, and welcome.
Thank you, Chair. So the report provides the quarter update on all treasury management activity for the financial year, so it runs up to the 30th of September. The period has largely been a continuation of the strategies and activities implemented during the first quarter, with no significant change in overall approach. However, there's been a notable reduction in total borrowing, which has decreased from 208.2 million at the end of quarter 1 to 179.2 million at the end of quarter 2. This reduction is primarily driven by the maturity of temporary loans. Some of these temporary loans are allowed to unwind naturally as planned, while others have already been refinanced in advance. The replacement temporary borrowing secured during the quarter has been obtained at more competitive rates, which, combined with the fact that the more expensive temporary borrowing now represents a smaller proportion of the overall debt portfolio, has contributed to a reduction in the average borrowing rate from 3.9% to 3.7%. As temporary borrowing has reduced during the quarter, there's been a corresponding decrease in short-term investment balances. Total investments have fallen from 37 million at the end of quarter 1 to 11.7 million at the end of quarter 2. Pooled funds have continued to perform strongly over the period, delivering an income return of 5.32%. This robust performance, combined with the pooled funds representing a larger proportion of the remaining investment portfolio, has contributed to an improvement in the average investment rate, increasing from 4.4% to 4.57%. In addition to the strong income performance, the capital value of the pooled funds has continued to improve over the quarter, increasing by £117,000. This improvement reduces the unrealised capital loss accumulated over the lifetime of the investment to £227,000. While these loans remain unrealised, do not impact current income returns, the valuation trend is positive, and pooled fund holdings will be reviewed regularly to identify potential opportunities for exit. I'd also like to draw the members' attention to developments in our ESG assessment framework. One of the voluntary charters we previously used to assess our investments, the Net Zero Asset Management investment, has suspended its activities and removed all targets from its signatories, pending review, citing government policy change primarily in the USA. As a result, the Net Zero Asset Managers Initiative will no longer be used as a formal measure when assessing ethical and ESG-aligned investment opportunities. The remaining ESG indicators continue to be monitored and applied consistently. Finally, the authority's non-treasury investments, NLP Castlegate and Solar Farm, forecast to generate £453,000 over the year, of net income during the year, representing 1.89% return. This is up from 1.6 at Q1. Subject to any further input from John, that concludes the update. Let me know if there's any questions or points that require further clarification.
Thank you, Dan. Let's go to questions and comments then, please. Suan.
Thank you, Chair. Appreciating that the Treasury report is a longer term sort of financial strategy, but I just had a question around the grant funding that's come from Welsh Government in relation to businesses, for the Storm Claudia, support. And I was wondering, Chair, if I could place on record, I think, and maybe the committee to join me in terms of congratulating the officers and the elected members of the council in terms of the work that they've done in terms of the Storm Claudia response, and appreciating how much work has gone into that, and for those persons here present also.
Yeah, I think so. I think we talked about this at our pre-meet, and we were inspired by the work officers and indeed elected members have done in terms of responding to the crisis which happened over the last several days. So really well done to all involved. It was an excellent team effort. Thank you. Tony, can I check your hands up? Did you want to come in?
Yes, please.
Over to you then, please.
Yeah, thank you. I'll come back to my usual question really about Castlegate Business Park and the assets we got. Oak Grove Farm, it's raining today, but it's still producing profits, which is good. Newport Leisure Park isn't quite performing like we wanted to do, but things going away there. Castlegate Business Park is a concern that it's been shown as a 7.5% loss, although markdowns have created a situation which it would have been at 1.42. Is it time to review where we actually are with Castlegate in reporting what its performance is? Because it seems to me that I think it's 90% occupied, but there's this little bit we never seem to be able to fill up. Should we be more realistic and put the Castlegate Business Park onto a footing which we can see as sustainable, not as a negative? We always seem to get as a negative. I'd like to see it as a positive. It's a very valuable resource. We had problems when Mitel went, but can we look at, as a committee, looking at revaluing where we sit to consider Castlegate Business Park?
Thank you, Tony. I'm not sure it's this committee's responsibility, but I think I'd like John to comment on the wider issue. And please, over to you, John.
Thank you, Chair. And it's a very valid input, Councillor Eason. I think it's important that we have a constructive discussion around this, and I think sometimes when we're coming from a background of what has happened with Castlegate over the last few years, that can sometimes be quite difficult. I think ultimately, this is a technical finance report, and we have to report on the numbers as they stand. And I think the chair has highlighted that performance monitoring comes under the remit of the scrutiny committee, and rightly so, as part of our governance arrangement. I think at the appropriate time, the valuation of the site will be revisited, and that will naturally allow for that return on investment to be updated, and we'll take account of the value of the site given the tenancy situation and the value it presents based on most recent market. So I think in conclusion, you're right to suggest that it's something we need to keep a close eye on. That valuation of the asset will naturally be updated as we go through our financial processes. So, yeah, I think we can take those comments probably into the scrutiny environment when that report comes in the new calendar year. And I'm sure that'll be a point of conversation at that stage where, and that's where that conversation needs to rightly take place.
Thank you. If I understood you correctly, John, that activity will take place in a new financial year?
New calendar year, Chair. I think it's currently scheduled for February, I believe. It may be early March.
Okay. Wendy, appreciating it's quite difficult, but if you could maybe sort of note an action, because I think we'd like to follow up with the Scrutiny Committee, pick up on Tony's point. Thank you, John.
Thank you.
Phil.
Just a quick one, John. Can you remind me, we've got lots of rent-free periods going. I think there's probably a major one dropping out now, which will improve the return substantially. Can you just remind me as to just where we are with the rent-free periods?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Councillor Murphy. So my understanding is that all rent-free periods are now have ended. So the current forecast that we have in the report reflects that. We're currently going through a budget process, looking at what those returns may look at for next financial year, 2026-27, and we'd naturally assume that the ending of those periods is going to improve that position when we have that full year effect taken account of for next financial year.
Good. Any further questions or comments, please? No? Good. I think we're satisfied. Thank you, Dan, for paper. Much appreciated. We could then move on to item 8. Item 8 is the Whole Authority Annual Complaints Report. Could I welcome Annette Evans, our Customer Relations Manager, to the meeting. Thank you for attending. Please assume we've read the report, but nonetheless highlight points of note.
Okay, thanks, Chair. Yes, so this report is to provide assurance to you excuse me, on the effectiveness of the authority's complaints and compliments processes for the period April 24 to March 25. So the main points are that there were 98 complaints, and that represented a 29% decrease from 22-23. Most of the complaints are those front-facing services, recycling and waste, highways, transport. And that's where we get the majority of our complaints most years. There were 359 comments, and that's a 10% decrease on the previous year. And lovely that compliments, we had 277 and a 10% increase on the previous year. So the trend is, compliments are going up, which is indicating a positive customer feedback. With regard to timeliness, 58% of stage 1 complaints met the 10-day target, which is slightly down on previous years. And stage 2s always tend to go over the timelines. Our challenges there is that there's capacity constraints for officers investigating formal complaints. These are officers, who have their day-to-day job, and, they take on a complaints investigation on top of that work. So it does, it does mean that often we do go over the timescales because they juggle in investigating a complaint and also doing their day-to-day work. But we are addressing that. We are trying to extend the pool of investigating officers, and together with continuing the Ombudsman's training for staff to improve the consistency and also help with the timeliness of dealing with stage 2 complaints. Social services, there were 50 complaints, so that's a slight increase on previous years, with an increase in children's services. Again, the timeliness of social services complaints, 65% of stage 1s were met within the 17-day target, which is better than previous years. Again, stage 2s, even though we have external independent persons for investigating social services, they go over the timescales because of the sheer complexities of the cases. Learning from complaints investigations is really important to us. Complaints often highlight recurring issues linked to human error and workload pressure rather than any systemic issues. We always, after a formal investigation, we always prepare an action plan so that recommendations from complaints are followed through, and these are sent to relevant heads of service so that they implement those recommendations and hopefully, take forward the learning. I think that's the key messages I wanted to bring to your attention.
Thank you, Annette. Okay, questions or comments? We'll go to Rodri first, please.
Thanks, Chair. Actually, one of my main questions was just answered as it happens, but we often hear about stretched resources in these meetings. So I was just wondering how viable the proposal is around widening the pool of officers to carry out investigations.
Well, we've highlighted that we have some ex-police officers who work in the Meals on Wheels service, and we are looking to engage with them to see whether they would be up for having some training on investigating complaints and helping out in that way.
Great. And another one as well. In the appendix, it talks about the complaints, compliments and comments. Does it include social media? And will it in the future? If it doesn't, I'm just thinking in terms of channel shift and the increased public preference for utilising digital comms as a way of interacting with bodies.
No, at present, no, we don't. We don't get many complaints from social media. Most complaints are from our feedback forms. People tend to complete the forms. So I don't know what the future holds. Do you, Matt?
Thank you for that. So, for the benefit of those watching at home, Matt Gatehouse, Chief Officer, People, Performance and Partnerships. Yeah, I think that's a really good point, because you're absolutely right that so much of the sort of traffic, the sort of feedback and comments on sort of local authority services as all aspects of life now come via social media. I think it is really important that we analyse the sentiment of what happens on social media and monitor those channels. And I know that's something our communications team do sort of very well and sort of consistently across the whole range of services we provide. Such is the sheer volume and breadth of that. At this point in time, we're not in a position of being able to sort of pull that into our sort of comments and sort of compliments policy, but certainly it is something that we watch and learn from as part of our sort of overall approach to delivering services.
Could I go to Suan, please?
My question relates to the timescales. Noting that the comment that you made in your introduction was about, we always tend to go over the timelines. Have, I suppose, collectively representations been made by local authorities to the Ombudsman about the realistic nature of the timelines for the stage 2 in particular, given the resource constraints here and presumably across the public sector?
Actually, it's the Welsh Government, not the Ombudsman. But we have, as an all Wales complaints group, we have made representations to the Welsh Government. I know we follow the Ombudsman's model, but they also set down suggested timescales. We have said that 10 working days, is very short. and most authorities, they don't they don't complete stage 1 investigations in those short timescales. But we do keep the complainants informed, and very often, they don't mind going over the timescales as long as, that there's been a thorough investigation. And again, with stage 2 investigations, 20 working days for officers to complete an investigation, and then 10 working days for the chief officer to respond. It is a short time scale. We can go up to 3 months if the investigation is complex. And to be honest, a lot of our complaints investigations at stage 2 take about 3 months.
Okay, thank you. Could I go to Peter Strong, please?
Thank you, Chair. I was going to say a bit about the timescales, but I think that's been dealt with already. But I will say a little bit about social media. I think it would be unwise to treat social media in a sort of formal sense in terms of complaints and so on. I think there's a lot that's said on social media. All right, well, people are entitled to their opinions, but those opinions are not always well informed, if I can put that diplomatically, and it's often done in the heat of the moment rather than being considered carefully. I think probably any councillor have got a similar experience to mine in that negative comments might be made about the council in general or even about them individually. I mean, it happened to me recently over the local development plan. Various comments were made about me on social media, quite a number, but not a single one of those bothered to email me to take up the points so that I could respond meaningfully to them. So unless they're prepared to do that, and in this case it's to fill in a complaint form or whatever, I think we shouldn't go any farther than Matt said, and just take the vibe, but do no more than that. Thank you.
Thank you. Valid points. Could I get the Matt Gatehouse, please?
Yes, thanks, Chair. It's sort of just to come back as well a little more on the point of target, because I think what's raised by the committee is a really sort of valid point around timescales, and it's something that we've discussed ourselves internally as to whether there would be some value in a local target which is more realistic, alongside those national targets which are set. The ideal situation would, of course, be for Wales to move as a whole through the sort of dialogue that Annette has suggested, because that would give residents a consistency. And, so we'll sort of continue to push for targets which are more realistic. But I think there is something for us to consider there in terms of setting a realistic internal benchmark as well, which we can sort of really be held to account for, and to look to do that alongside the changing approach in terms of hoping to bring in some more investigating officers that Annette has referred to.
Thank you, Matt. Tony.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I concur with Councillor Strong's comments about the social media. I've been recently maligned on social media, and if you get involved and answering back and forward, you finish up in a bigger hole than you started off with. And I think that would occur if, for example, we took on complaints of council processes, we get into dialogue which then it wouldn't come up with a proper conclusion. So I think social media is a dodgy place to keep off myself. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. An observation from me. So Annette set out, we had 98 complaints in the last financial year. 98 strikes me as being a very low figure. So for me, on the face of it, well done, so clearly we must be doing something right, and I've been doing right most of the time. So that's real credit to the council as a whole and the officers who manage via the authority. And I think I know the answer here in terms of how helpful it would be, but have you any sort of sense in terms of how those numbers of complaints in our council compare to other councils across Wales, please?
Our complaints are low in relationship to other authorities. Our neighbouring authorities, Torfaen, Blaen y Gwent, we're probably lower than them. But then the likes of Caerphilly and Newport, they receive more complaints than us, and then the larger authorities, RCT, Swansea, etc., you know, they're in the hundreds. So yes, I agree with you that our complaints, 98 complaints, you know, is a fairly low number really in comparison to the services that we provide. So.
Okay, no, thank you. I'm just checking for any final questions or comments before we move on. Peter, you've still got your hand up, but I presume that's just an oversight. Otherwise, I think we can move on. So once again, thanks for the paper, Annette, much appreciated. Move on to item 9. Item 9 is the Ombudsman's annual letter. I think it's back to Annette to talk us through this one.
Yes, thanks, Chair. Yes, well, this is the Ombudsman annual letter that they ask us to bring to your attention. It's their letter, their report. So all I can do is reiterate really what they say in their annual letter. And the key things really are that, you know, they've asked us to note the contents and ensure that we continue engagement with the Ombudsman standards, their staff training and data sharing, which we do. So the key findings are that 19 complaints were received about Monmouthshire County Council for this time period, and that's 10 fewer than previous year. 16 complaints were closed with no formal investigations, and there was one early resolution intervention. And really we didn't... we weren't able to, I can't think of the word I'm thinking of, we're not able to comply with that recommendation because it was down to the complainant actually that wasn't available. So that's why we weren't able to, the compliance on that recommendation. The most common outcomes, the decision not to investigate, there was 6. Premature complaints, there were 7. And early resolution, 1. So as I just mentioned about the 2 recommendations, the compliance slightly late due to the delays outside of our control. There were 7 code of conduct complaints against councillors, and none of those were investigated. There was a lack of evidence and it wasn't in the public interest to do so. With regard to the town and community councils, there were 14 complaints regarding Mega with Undy, Lantilio Patholi, there were 2, us town council 2, but there were no breaches found. So that's sort of the key messages, I think, out of the Ombudsman's annual letter that they've asked to bring to your attention and for any action that you may wish to take forward.
Thank you, Annette. Just one question from me initially. Could you remind me, when you talk about an intervention, what's that actually mean?
That's where the Ombudsman's office has contacted us and made a proposal and asked if we will go with that proposal. So the proposal might be to carry out a stage 2 investigation, or perhaps to provide some an apology, or some sort of financial redress. And then, if we agree to that, that's what they call an intervention.
Thank you. Could go to members for questions and comments. Start with Peter, please.
Yeah, thank you. 2 points. We receive all this information about town and community councils. I'm not sure why. What sort of supervisory position are we in over those councils? Because my understanding was that they were entirely independent of us. So that's the first one. Second one, there's a reference in there to unpaid carers and certain recommendations. I'd like to seek assurance that those recommendations have been implemented. We probably can't get that today because we would need Chief Officer Health and Social Care, I would imagine. But if we can receive that at some stage, that would be very useful. Thank you.
Thank you. I'll just check, Vanette. Are you able to answer any of his questions, at least initially, please?
Matt may be able to.
Yes, thanks. On the first one, I'm afraid I don't have the information in terms of the second one. But on the first, when you look at the letter, you'll see it's also sent to the authority's monitoring officer. And while we don't have responsibility for the standards in those organisations, our monitoring officer does oversee that and is able to sort of intervene and advise in those cases. So that's the purpose, not the authority as a whole, but just the monitoring officer role who performs that for town and community councils.
Can I come back? Intervene and advise. I'm not quite sure what that... Well, I understand what advise means, and that's different from instruct. Intervene?
I'm not sure that my choice... Was that my choice of wording there? In which case it may have been an ill-advised choice of wording, and probably one I would want to refer to the monitoring officer on, because I don't have an exact knowledge of his role within those cases. So perhaps I can get our monitoring officer and head of law and governance to give a more thorough update to the committee in writing.
Thank you. That would be sensible if you could note those actions, please. I think I have a sense in terms of what the monitoring officer's responsibilities are, but best to get it from the horse's mouth, so to speak. Tony, over to you, please.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Regarding the monitoring officer and other agencies, they don't have any authority to intervene in community councils, as far as I'm aware, although the public do have the right to make complaints if that's the case to the appropriate authorities. But this letter to me is really the Ombudsman marking their own homework. The first sentence says, as you know, our role as the Public Service Ombudsman of Wales is to consider complaints about public services. Well, public services to me is our community councils and other services in and around, and I think that the Ombudsman should be looking at their position to cover the points that Matthew has taken, whereby there could be interventions from maybe the monitoring office or other people. I also read the review into the operations and process carried out by the Senate into the concerns of one officer who made some political comments. A reasonable report. I'm not sure it was a sledgehammer trying to crack a nut, but I think the outcome was okay. But I do believe that the Ombudsman should really consider how they do deal with complaints about public services, rather than be in a position that, as Matthew says, the monitoring officer may not be able to get involved, or even Jan may not be able to get involved as Chief Internal Auditor. I think there's a bit of a hole there which needs to be filled, quite honestly.
Okay, thank you. I'm not sure Matt's in a position to comment on that matter, but no? Okay, but yeah, it's a point that we can note at this stage. Okay. I'm not seeing any of the hands raised, in which case we can draw this item to a close and thank Annette and Matt for their helpful contributions. If we could move on then to item 10. Item 10 is an update paper on the panel performance assessment process. We can hand back over to Matt Gatehouse to talk us through the paper, please.
Yeah, thanks very much, Chair. And apologies, I was just trying to dive into a bit of legal guidance there, so I got momentarily distracted. So returning to the next agenda item, the panel performance assessment is a requirement placed on local authorities in Wales under the Local Government and Elections Act 2021. One of the things that Act does is put in place some of the performance arrangements which local authorities are expected to have. County councils will be familiar with the annual self-assessment report. Indeed, all members of this committee will, because you have a role in that, which is undertaken by the authority itself annually. The panel performance assessment supplements that. It's carried out once every 5 years, and the requirement is on the local authority to appoint an independent panel and to produce a scope, and to invite that panel to come in and evaluate the activities of the authority against that scope. similar to the self-assessment, there is a role for Governance and Audit Committee within that. And so with that in mind, what we've done today is bring forward the draft scope to the committee with the opportunity to sort of ask any questions more broadly around the process and ensure that you're briefed early on so that when we do get to that stage in the process, the committee have the opportunity to get up to speed and involved in this. So the panel, sort of the requirements and roles within the panel are set out there. We have appointed or agreed the appointment of a chair to the panel, who is Bev Smith, former local authority chief exec from England, currently, and I believe her term is shortly coming towards its end, chair of the Boundary Commission in Wales. And then there are a number of other appointments to the panel performance assessment that we're progressing but haven't quite got the individuals signed on the dotted line. We're supported in this process by the WLGA. So the WLGA put in place officers to support this process and support the panel, and they're also on site as part of this arrangement. And they also advise and guide Cabinet on the scope. So what you see within the paper as well is the draft scope for this audit. And sorry, I just moved off my papers, but hopefully everyone else has got that in front of them and can see that. I won't sort of read that out, but you can see the shape of what we're asking the Cabinet to evaluate and look at there. And the other thing I would say about this process, we're looking really to get two things from it. One is learning, that the Cabinet looks at that, the panel looks at that and gives advice and thoughts on where we could potentially learn and improve against our activities using their breadth of experience. And the other aspect to that is assurance. And that assurance from the panel that what we're doing is appropriate. And that brings in then the role of the Governance and Audit Committee. The report that's produced at the end of this is the report of the panel. The authority doesn't write the report. We can't intervene or change the report, but we do have to respond to it. And therein sort of is the role for Governance and Audit Committee to ensure that that is done appropriately, that the feedback, the response to that report is appropriate and proportionate in order to give that necessary assurance that we are getting the value we would hope to see from this panel performance assessment.
Thank you, Matt. An initial comment from me. You described the panel as being independent, yet we appoint the panel members and determine the scope. Could you say a few words about the extent to which that panel is truly independent of the council, please?
Yes, of course. So although we appoint the panel, what I would say is that is done in conjunction with the WLGA. The panel have a sort of predetermined role, and there are certain roles that panel members must undertake. So that the chair should be completely independent. We're required to have a senior local government officer on that, someone from outside the world of local government, as well as a senior councillor. And though that panel is guided by the WLGA, and while we appoint the panel, each panel member is expected to undergo training through the WLGA and are briefed in terms of their role. And there is someone from the WLGA on site at all times to ensure that that role is fulfilled and that work is undertaken independently. But it is not the same as the work that we see coming into this committee from Audit Wales, and in other committees, CIW, Estin, who are regulators. This is a different role and supplements and sort of backs up the work of self-assessment as well. But I think when we looked at this, it's not an undertaking on the scale of some of the other regulatory activity you may see when you look across the whole year, and that scope has to be realistic for a team of 4, 5, 6 people to undertake in what is 3.5 to 4 days on site with some pre-reading and preparation.
Thank you for that clarification. You've made a very helpful distinction between this panel process versus the other regulatory bodies that we are possibly more used to. And I understand that panel is more advisory in nature rather than mandatory. So thank you. It's a very, very helpful commentary. We could go to members for questions and comments. Start with Peter, please.
Thanks, Chair. From what you said, and also noted in the report, that it very much supplements the annual self-assessment report, and for that reason it's coming up at performance and overview as well. At performance overview, it's often been argued that one of the problems is the lack of the facility for benchmarking. And I was going to ask, will this panel assist in that process? But I'm guessing from what you say, it's going to be far too general and brief to be of much value in that, and it will deal more with, are we following the right processes rather than with the actual outcomes? Would that be a correct reading? And is that therefore a bit of a disappointment if that's the case?
Well, you'll see from the scope that one of the things we've asked the panel to look at, because it is recognised as an issue, it's something that members will know that Cabinet and the leader have a real focus on, is demonstrating impact and outcome. So one of the things that the scope reflects is for the panel to form a view on that. It is a challenge. I will come back to the benchmarking point, but demonstrating impact and outcome is always challenging, particularly as members of this committee will know when we're focused on long-term programmes that address complex societal challenges, and you don't see a shift in outcome over quarters or often even years, because it takes a long time to shift some of those things. So we're often looking at proxy measures or output measures when we would really like to be measuring outcomes. And that is an ongoing work for us. We'll do a lot, and hopefully members will be familiar with some of the work that Richard and Hannah, for example, do through the self-assessment and the sort of generation of a set of outcome measures which we can track alongside the targeted input-output process measures that are more directly within our control. On the point of benchmarking, it is an area where perhaps we in Wales don't have as much comparable data across public bodies as we would like. There is, I think, again, an increased focus on that, so working through the likes of Data Cymru, part of the WLGA, to get more comparable data that we can look at and learn across the board. But we also recognise, I think, that one of the limitations we have when we're looking at Wales-only data, because there is a difference between Wales, England, the UK, and what's available globally, is if we are looking to benchmark against the best and looking to benchmark against the quality of services that we want and which the residents of Monmouth have a right to expect, the chances of finding that very best cutting-edge practice always in a nation of 3 million people is going to be limited. We will find some of it here. There are some excellent public services, but benchmarking itself is only part of that sort of desire to look outwards and learn from the very best, whether it's Australia, Germany, Scandinavia, and we always have to have our eyes open and our heads up to see where we can learn from and look to improve.
Thanks. I guess we just have to wait till we get the report to see if it's of much value to us in terms of improving our practice or not. Thank you.
Can I get to Sue-Ann, please?
Yes, my question follows on from the conversation so far in terms of the involvement of the other regulators. I suppose particularly when you look at the requirements under the Act for this in terms of exercising functions effectively, using resources efficiently, effectively, economically, having effective governance. Well, that's all kind of performance audit that's what Audit Wales does, isn't it? And then you've got Estin and, all the other regulators is thinking, how is there an interaction between the panel and those authorities, noting that there's a requirement for the panel to report back to them and to the Welsh ministers. So will happen, you know, how does that work? And I suppose the second thing is around, you know, the talking about the outcomes, you know, the involvement of the citizens. So how is the panel in 3 days going to assess the views of the people of Monmouthshire about these things? And I guess it comes back to, you know, the final comment of my colleague just now about, you know, how valuable this exercise is, but that's not something fair for officers to comment.
Okay, I don't know to what extent you're able to comment at this stage, Matt. Don't feel obliged to if you don't wish to.
Oh, no, I'd certainly try. I mean, it is early days for this, so this is still learning for us, the first time we will have gone through this process. We are talking to other authorities that have been through it, through sort of regular meetings facilitated again by the WLGA. The report or the panel assessment won't look at every single piece of activity done by every regulator, but they will have access to all of that. And as part of the information we prepare for them in advance, we'll be drawing their attention to some of those reports and activities. So I wouldn't be surprised if one of the pieces of evidence the panel look at would be perhaps the recommendations paper that comes to this committee, looking at how we've implemented previous audit recommendations as part of that assurance. So that wealth of evidence will be available to them. But again, we have to recognise that they will have limited capacity to delve into a depth of evidence. The one things we do have, which will hopefully help the panel in terms of residents' perspective, is our resident survey, which we carried out for the first time in 2024 and has just closed the 2025 iteration. We had over 1,000 responses to this year's, so that will give them a good understanding, and a lot of those questions can be benchmarked across other local authorities. So back to Councillor Strong's point, there's a good bit of benchmarking data there in terms of the questions asked. What the panel will probably also do, again, early days in terms of the scope, is ask us to arrange a citizens panel or focus group, and they will again set the parameters around that. So we'll probably end up with a group of residents somewhere around the county that get invited in to give views directly to the panel on different issues. So there'll be a number of different ways for that perspective to be fed in.
Okay, thank you. Did you want to come back at all, Sue-Ann?
No, thank you. That was really helpful.
Thanks. Can I go to Tony first, then Phil? Tony, please.
Thank you, Chair. Well, this is set up under the Local Government Act 2021. I'm not really sure what its outcomes are supposed to be. What role does the Welsh Local Government Association play? Maybe a bit of knowledge from me on this. What role does it play in government other than being a body of council leaders coming together? Where does that link into Welsh Government? Where does it link into ourselves as an authority? Especially on the basis that it seems to me the independent panel will be made of the independent chair, somebody from the public, a chief executive and elected member. I suppose the answer is let's wait for the first report to see if it's worthwhile.
I think so. Matt, did you want to comment? No need.
It's just
I think it's an observation, yes. So yeah, proof
yeah.
being the pudding. Okay. Thank you. Phil, please.
Thank you, Chair. Couple of things, Matt. I see that it says, you did allude to it in your presentation, that this must take place at least once every electoral cycle. The question I had on that was, what would be likely to trigger a further report other than the one laid down in the 2021 Act? I note that the appointed chair has got a lot of experience in England, some in Wales. I'm sure she's up to the job. I just wondered whether or not she was used to working with the Welsh regulations, because they're certainly not the same as England, as we all know. And do they get paid for it? And if they do, are we paying for it, or is somebody else?
Yeah, please.
Yeah. So I'll just take those in reverse order. Do they get paid for it? Yes, they do. So they will have a daily sort of fee, sort of acting on a consultancy basis. We pay for it indirectly, but not directly from our revenue budget. So what's happening for the first cycle of reports? The WLGA is both supporting and from its budget funding the cost of those arrangements. So of course we pay subscriptions into the WLGA to the tune of sort of £80,000 a year for the full WLGA membership. So we are paying indirectly, but there's no additional cost over and above the financial commitment.
Don't know what the rate is, do you?
Recently.
Don't answer that.
Recently.
I am assured that the WLGA are looking after our resources very well in this process, and there will certainly not be excessive fees paid for that.
That was a
in terms of the Wales-wide, your point around sort of experience within Wales. Interesting. So the WLG and local authorities have gone out and sort of invited people to come forward and be members of different panels. So our own leader, Councillor Brocklesby, has been a panel member in Rhondda and Taff fairly recently as a councillor. So there's a breadth on each panel. So we will have people from experience within Wales, but we're also keen to get that breadth of experience, recognising that Wales is a small place. We can all tend to know a lot of the peers. So it's really good to have someone with a little bit more geographical distance from the network to bring that independent perspective. I'm not aware, and Richard may be able to correct me. He probably knows the guidance a little more intricately than I do, but I think whether this were to sort of trigger then any subsequent work would depend on the outcome of it, but it would be down to the authority to commission that. The second element of it is there is a weight of evidence here that will be received by the authority, but is also in the public domain. As I said, we can't alter that report, we can't push back, we can't ask for change to it, and that'll be made available to the range of regulators as well as Welsh ministers. So if there is something that sort of determines further work is needed, we can be sure that there'll be a weight of voices making that point to us alongside our own judgment.
Yeah, please, Richard.
Exactly right, Matt, in terms of the follow-up be determined by those recommendations and the nature of them if made. I think the other broad point I want to make around, I think it's quite a bit of discussion around the value of the process. I just link it back to what Matt said about how it aligns to our self-assessment, our annual self-assessment report. I think we've discussed as a committee how that is our own annual self-assessment informed by a range of evidence, and the legislation it falls under directs us to be sort of self-improving organisations as councils. Part of the reason the arrangements have this independent panel in place is to then come in and independently test out some of those arrangements. Obviously, this time framed through the scope that's in the paper before you, but I think we have had challenge about how we make sure independently as well as for our own evidence and that of our regulators we are tested, and that is the benefit. One of the benefits of this panel is to provide some of that independent test, and we look forward to seeing the report accordingly at the end of the process.
Okay, thank you. I think that's a very useful discussion. So thanks for bringing that paper. Much appreciated. We'll now move on to item 11. Item 11 is a paper on our risk management framework. Could I welcome Richard Jones and Hannah Carter to a meeting. Richard Jones, our Performance and Data Insight Manager. Hannah Carter is our Data Analyst. So I think it'll be a double act, but I'll ask Richard to start.
Thanks, Chair. Good afternoon, everyone. I'll briefly pick up the headlines, and obviously Hannah and I'll answer any questions you have. So as part of our regular 6-month report to you as a committee assessing the effectiveness of our risk management arrangements, made up of 2 parts: our own assessment of progress for those arrangements and the effectiveness of them, and then a brief update overview of our current risk environment for those risks on our strategic risk register. Firstly, in terms of the effectiveness of the risk management arrangements, I think it's important to track back to the developments we made to our strategic risk management policy that we brought forward to you in June. And at the point that revised risk management policy was adopted, which is obviously heavily influenced by your feedback and scrutiny in terms of how we develop our arrangements, we agreed that there'd be a sort of 12-month phased implementation of those arrangements. We've come to the end of that 12 months, and I'm pleased to report that the vast majority of the arrangements that are either developed or new as part of that policy have now been implemented. To draw your attention to a few of them, so we've developed the structure of our strategic risk register. That includes things like risk categories, the application of our risk appetite levels, and target risk scores. We've developed a risk radar that looks a bit more to the horizon of potential risks that could impact Monmouthshire over time. You'll see a summary of that in the paper, and that's informing our strategic risk management identification and mitigation. Also, we have implemented risk appetite statement and ranges that continue to guide our work. We have nearly completed the implementation of director risk registers, and I'll come back to that in a minute. And we've also looked to integrate other related risk management arrangements within the construct of our strategic risk arrangements. And as a committee, you're familiar with the report we've brought forward to you around things like insurance, emergency planning arrangements as well, and had the assessment of the effectiveness of those as part of our wider risk arrangements in the council. So, I'm pleased that we've made that progress. I hope the assessment in front of you could see demonstrates the impact some of those arrangements starting to make in terms of strengthening our risk management process. In terms of our assessment of areas still left to develop, so firstly, we'd hope to address all director risk registers. There is one directorate risk register remaining to be completed. But nonetheless, those that have are now an important part of the risk process. I think our learning from that has been we as a team have provided quite a bit of support into directorate management teams in developing their risk registers. For us, that has been positive because we managed to spend more time with them, both helping them understand the new requirements, but also embedding those not just in the directorate risk, but in their service risk registers as well. So that's been time well spent for us in terms of strengthening risk management, not just at a strategic level, but then down in a directorate level. However, that has meant our time as a team has been a bit stretched in terms of our second key area for development, which is around ensuring consistency across the council of application of the arrangements. The director risk registers are playing an important part of that. The second part of that we committed to was around developing strategic risk management training across the organisation. We haven't done that, but we're now committing to do that by April, which will align with our service business planning process. But again, just to emphasise that there's been a lot of support through particularly through the director risk management registers being established that has supported services. And so that's sort of our assessment of where we are at the moment and progress made and our next steps. And then finally, part two of the update gives you an overview of our current risks, and we've drawn out there in the summary in point 3.6 some of the main changes. But as ever, just to reiterate, it's a live document and will continue to be updated. And the full register will be presented both to Cabinet for endorsement in December and also to Performance and Overview Scrutiny, who fulfil the role in scrutinising the content and application of the actual strategic risks and the management and mitigation of those. So hopefully that's a helpful overview for you, Chair, and the committee, and happy to take any questions.
So thank you, Richard. Some good progress outlined there, so thank you for your hard work. So questions or comments, please? You might be getting the easy ride here. Or Colin.
Somebody had to, Chair. Yeah, so I was just going to ask around, there's quite a few things on the register here around vulnerability. And I'm just wondering whether they're up there because it's about vulnerability rather than they're more likely ahead of other strategic risks that the council faces, such as, my take on on vulnerability would be it's around practitioners. So do practitioners have the experience, support, training, financial resources, other resources to deliver for the vulnerable people? Whereas this is sort of, things like that they need buildings and structures. I think, well, they're never going to get off the risk register. So that's why I wonder whether that's the best way of dealing with that risk.
Yeah, important question. I think firstly it's probably important to distinguish between this is a strategic risk register, identifying risks that could affect the delivery to the council's objectives. Therefore, by its nature, is talking about some of those longer term strategic issues that could have an impact on well-being or vulnerability of our residents we serve. I think being a strategic risk register, when we identify risks, there are going to be risks given the nature of the services we provide as a council that do lead us to identify potential risks, that vulnerability. I think probably an example there is, we're right, and I think it's important to recognise the ongoing potential risk we've got around significant harm to vulnerable adults or children. We've identified in our risk levels that we are tolerating that risk and managing it to the best of our ability. But there is always a chance something could happen, even though our arrangements are trying to mitigate that as much as we feel we can within the levers we've got to do that. I think the other couple of risks around vulnerability, around risks to vulnerable children and vulnerable adults, we are looking to mitigate that risk level down from its current level. So we are looking to actively, through our mitigating actions, bring that level down. Again, a range of complex issues at play that are driving some of that risk at the moment. But for those two risks, they are on there because they are strategic risks. We are looking to reduce in the level. They are looking to reduce to a medium level, which would mean, should they get there, they would still be maintained on our strategic risk register. So it comes back to your point, but they are not at that level yet, and that's why they're factors of strategic risk we need to keep an eye on our strategic risk register across the whole authority.
Thank you. Let me just check with Tony. You've still got your hand up. Did you want to come in?
Yes, please. Yeah.
Yeah, please. Over to you then.
Regarding potential risk about the low risk one you've got as a mitigation low risk, residents are unable to secure or retain suitable accommodation. Surely that's a higher risk than low with the number of households, number of people in Monmouthshire needing properties to live in. How do you calculate that, or how do you see that in the scheme of things in terms of homelessness?
Yeah, thank you, Councillor Easton. I think...
sorry,
John.
Sorry, okay. Carry on. I was looking at Matthew then, but not yourself. Of course, all right.
Definitely Richard.
Yeah, wrong way.
I'm not responsible for the whole risk, Tony, but I can hopefully give you an explanation. I think that the low risk we identify there is our target risk score. So that's where we want to mitigate this risk down to once we take all our mitigating actions. At the moment, the pre-mitigation risk level is certified as high risk level 12. We've assessed that the mitigating actions we've been taken so far, particularly within homelessness, so things like our rapid rehousing approach, reducing sort of reliance on B&B accommodation, for example, is having an impact on lowering that risk. But we still recognise there is residual risk there. Hence, it's scored at a medium level currently post-mitigation. We hope through the continuing work we undertake as part of our homeless interventions, along with potential impact of our RLDP, should that be adopted, would help to lower that risk level further and meet our target risk level as low. But at the moment, our current assessment is that's not currently projected to happen within 3 years. We've currently assessed the risk, but that is our longer term aim to reduce that risk level to low. But accepting the points you make, Councillor Easton, that there is a range of factors that can influence that, and we'll keep that risk. And
you mentioned the RLDP as going forward. God forbid it falls, but if it became a problem, how would it affect that risk, do you reckon?
I think again,
we
would reassess the risk based on the nature of the evidence looking forward at the time.
Okay, thank you.
Good answer, thank you. Right, a question from me, and I think it's questions we directed at Peter Davis. So, within the risk register itself, and also your risk radar, you talk about climate-related emergencies, and clearly we've had Storm Claudia, and the excellent response we've seen to that. will there be, once you've come up for air, will there be a sort of lessons learned exercise undertaken in terms of what particularly went well, what didn't quite go as well as you'd have liked? And if so, which committee, if indeed it'll come to committee, would it come to, please? We're quite keen to understand how it plays through to the risk register and in particular, the proposed mitigating actions.
Thanks, Chair. Good question. I think the response will ultimately be multifaceted. I think if I just reflect, I guess, in the way that we respond from a civil contingencies perspective to any emergency, so in the response phase, and then through to recovery where we are now already. I think from an emergency planning perspective, there will be, there will be learning as a matter of course. I think that's been my experience, I guess, and unfortunately over recent years where those mechanisms have been triggered sometimes too often, but it's the world that we now live in, I guess, to a degree. So I think I'm comforted in terms of that continual learning that will feed back into that process. And I think, if my memory serves me correctly, I think you had emergency planning in to the committee recently in the cycle. So I'm sure there will be a future opportunity for you to consider a lens back into that at an appropriate point. In terms of the flood event, there will be what is called a Section 19 report that will need to be produced by the Council in conjunction with key stakeholders, and on this one it will be National Resource Wales in particular. I think the Council's already made public commitments to look to accelerate the timeline for that report to be produced, and I would expect certainly an initial output certainly to be shared early part of next year, even if the full report takes a little longer because it's got to be done well and comprehensively. Obviously, that will look at the specific incident. And I think we probably recognise that the flooding, whilst somewhat unprecedented and unique in Monmouth town, I guess, the reflections on, for example, Skenfrith, which I think has been, hit, unfortunately, too many times in short number of years. And I know will be actively being looked at and again by NRW. To understand, I guess, what action they want to take in looking at feasibility, business cases or otherwise to look at future solutions. Beyond that, we will need to look at our own infrastructure, and in terms of how that's been impacted, that will naturally lead us into conversations with both Welsh Government and UK Government. Because some of that bill is going to be relatively large, I would imagine, and I think there's probably a broader conversation anyway with Welsh Government, given, and I think to the inference, I guess, and actually the fact that we're seeing increased regularity of such events. So I think the Deputy First Minister, in conversations with us in recent days, and said the same thing publicly. I think he's keen to try and look at appropriate solutions, probably more so to try and contain water in the catchment, in probably more natural ways than I guess trying to build higher and higher and higher flood defences. So, as I said, I think it's multifaceted. I think relevant scrutiny committees will clearly have a role to play here, as some of the reports and findings clearly work their way back through, and clearly there'd be public interest in a lot of that, given what we've seen in the last couple of weeks. Probably just to put on record again and to echo comments that have been made, and for very good reason. Comments of thanks to the multi-agency response that came around dealing with the flood situation, the volunteer effort that's come to the fore, and how the community's galvanised around all of that. Remarkable to see, really, and in such a short time. I was probably stuck in a room, dark room, on Teams calls for most of the weekend of the flood incident through to the Monday, and then took an opportunity to walk up Morrow Street on, I think, the Monday. I think it was a Monday. Days all blur into each other in the last couple of weeks, but remarkable actually how Morrow Street, for example, had turned from what I'd seen via video and photo on the Saturday to what I saw on Monday in terms of a clean street. Not the case when I obviously went into a house or a business that had been affected, and that's where the hard work starts ultimately. So hopefully in a rounded way, that's sort of provided some comfort and clarity in terms of what we should ultimately look to see by way of response and action. I think the Governance and Audit Committee will have a particular interest and lens possibly in some of the arrangements and the robustness of those, and there'll be other scrutiny committees that will clearly have other interests.
Thank you. That was very helpful. If I could go to Anne in the first instance, please.
Yeah, thank you, Peter. And I can't let this moment go without thanking you and officers, residents, and all the other people that were involved with this huge operation. I took the opportunity. I didn't feel like going to Monmouth really because I was frightened of what I was going to see, but I did walk down the main street in Monmouth, and it's still a devastation area really. But I must thank all of you, Peter, and all the time spent in unsocial hours and unsocial places over the last weekend. Thank you so much. The only comment I had yesterday, they were really, the people that I spoke to were really complimentary about us and about the other people involved. And they said sometime, if it ever happens again, could we have a pop-up shop for milk and bread, because they were having to go quite a long way for their supplies. They were involved with the work and on site for supplies like that. So I don't know if there's anything that we can consider for the future, Peter, but that's just a comment from me. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Webb. I will take your point away. We have, as you will well imagine, we've got a very active recovery coordination group. We have a humanitarian subgroup sat within that. I'm very aware that 2 of the main supermarkets are currently closed and for an extended period due to the flood damage. So I think it's a point well made. I'll take that back in and understand as to what action it might probably is already being taken. But to the extent that it isn't, I'll certainly look into it for you.
Thank you, Peter.
Thank you. Sarah, please.
Thank you. Risk 3. With regards to the capital programme, I think we understand the massive constraints that we are under there, financial, in terms of the gap between what we would see as necessary and what we're able to do, but also the ability to deliver the capital programme that we are able to commit to. You've got listed the Capital and Asset Management Working Group being established to strengthen the scrutiny and challenge of the capital programme. Is that actually, is that an improving situation? Taking on board the fact that we now have a whole load of other damaged assets that will need to be repaired.
Yes, I'll provide very brief response. I'm being called out of committee. Yes, there is a real challenge on the capital footing. We will have to take considered decisions on that over the medium term as part of our medium-term financial planning. There will need to be some very strong conversations with Welsh Government, but equally UK Government. The existing infrastructure and its deterioration is obviously an issue, not just as a result of, for example, storm damage, but just aging infrastructure. We need to have equal regard to that as much as we do new assets. So thank you.
Great, thank you. Unless there's any more questions or comments, I suggest we move on. So thank you for paper, Richard and Hannah, and it generated a very sort of helpful discussion. Move on to item 12. Item 12 is the forward work plan. We usually note it, so I'm not going to sort of ask for any comments. Item 13, we're being asked to approve minutes of previous meeting. Thank you, Wendy, once again for excellent set of minutes. I'm going to note that we approved them. Not sure it makes sense, but we approved them. And the final item is to note the date of the next meeting, which is 15th of Jan next year. Thank you one and all for your contribution, and thank you for officers and colleagues from Audit Wales. On that note, we'll close the meeting.
Merry Christmas and Happy New Year.